everyone. So we're here from Audio Excellence. Adrian is not here today, so I guess I'm somewhat leading. Villa forced me to. So we're interviewing Nelson Pass today, and he's here with us. And Philip is right there. Say hi, Philip.
Hey. Hi, Nelson.
So Nelson, thank you very much for coming here and doing the interview with us. So we'll ask you some very basic questions, and then Philip will interject and ask some very hard questions. And I think that's how we're going to go about this.
I'm the silly factor, actually.
Oh, I thought you were good cop, bad cop.
Well.
Who's a good cop?
Happy cop, sad cop, maybe.
All right. Okay. So, Nelson, what is your background in education and in some of the playing music field?
Well, I got a bachelor degree in physics at UC Davis. And after that, I went to work in the industry. And after that, that was my education. And
so like you never played like the spoons or anything like that.
When I was young, I played the drums.
Ah, see, there you go, Jay. I told you you played them.
But I didn't pursue it.
Okay.
So, because actually I wasn't very good at all.
I remember that in one of the interviews I did with you that you mentioned school was awfully easy for you. So was there no hardship at school at all? Was it very easy for you?
Well, actually, eventually there was, because I never learned how to study. And when I hit more advanced section of education at Davis, I found that I was behind the curve by virtue of, never having developed any study habits at all. So actually it kind of caught me in first quarter of my college education. I was having a serious problem, and then I had to adapt, and I did.
So why audio? How'd you get into audio, and why audio?
I just kind of grew up with it, and I listened to music, and So as a result of that, I wanted to have it around, and I started buying records, and I got a little hi-fi set, and then I got some better speakers for it. Then I got a better amplifier for that and a better turntable. And that progression just, continued all the way well into my college years. When I arrived at college, I fell in with a very serious audiophile crowd with expensive equipment. Macintosh, JBL, AR, and let's see.
Marantz?
No, I didn't catch any Marantz with these guys, but I was trying to think of the other brand. It was the
HK? Sherwood?
No, well, the kits. Who was making the kits?
Dynacos?
Dynaco. That's what I was looking for. Dynacos were very popular, and so and in fact, in my second year, I simply shared an apartment with 4 other guys, all of whom had hi-fi equipment. We had it was packed with equipment, and we would play tunes through all of it at one time. So we were very popular with the neighbors.
So who was your biggest musical influence then? Who did you listen to and admire at the time?
Well, about the time that I really started figuring things out, I think Frank Zappa became the biggest influence. And when I was still in high school, I got a copy of Freak Out and Lumpy Gravy and Uncle Meat and Reuben and the Jets. And then at this late date, I have a very complete Zappa collection.
Do you want to interject and go on with the next question, or?
Gee, I mean, Adrian gave us an entire list of stuff. So, I mean, did you begin to, you were experimenting with all this gear that was coming in, what were the sonic priorities then? You know, this is all tube gear with
well, we
relatively
weren't
big speakers.
we weren't very sophisticated. We were trying to get things to work. You know, we were building our own speakers. A little bit later, we started building our own amplifiers, and I had always fooled around with this stuff ever since I was a little kid. I mean, when I was 12, I built a Jacob's ladder with a 10,000 volt power transformer that used to drive neon signs. What these people thought they were doing it, but selling it to a little kid like me was beyond understanding, because it was 10,000 volts and it weighed about 50 pounds. This was a really powerful transformer, and it would have killed you very quickly.
Well, you know what they say is that what doesn't kill you makes you, you know.
Well, in this case, what doesn't kill you entertains the crap out of you, because a Jacob's ladder, that's that thing with the two, like a V, it goes with a spark.
Mm-hmm.
You see it in the science fiction movies.
Is that why you love such low-powered equipment now? I mean, is that?
No, it's just that's the kind of stuff I was doing as a kid, and so it was just natural to, you know, take on the same kind of fooling around and seeing what you could do attitude with hi-fi, and of course speakers are very easy to build. The very first pair that I ever made were made out of cardboard, and then I put that driver in an actual wooden box later on, and then a little later I got a tweeter. You can see the progression. And by the time I was in my second year, I was selling loudspeakers.
So how did you get involved with ESS?
Well, part of the crowd that I was running in was a guy who was helping. You know, he and I were both building loudspeakers and selling them. He had a roommate named Peter Wehrback, who was this absolute electronics genius. I mean, I still not sure I've met anybody quite as smart as he. And he was designing his own amplifiers. And the early ones they were based on the RCA kind of circuitry that later ended up in, say, phase linear as a fine example, in the 400 and 700. So he was building stuff that was similar to that, in some ways a little more sophisticated. And meanwhile, there were these guys in Sacramento, a little speaker company in a house in Sacramento, who they started out with electrostats. They had Jensen electrostatic panels and KEF woofers and KEF mid-ranges, and they were building big, expensive, high-end, home loudspeakers. And Peter got to know them, and they decided that they wanted to get into the amplifier business as well. So they hired him, moved out of the house down to a small industrial facility. And shortly thereafter, because I was acquainted with Peter, I got introduced to these guys. And they basically went, "Oh, well, you look like a smart kid. How about you work for us?" And so I had a job. Actually, I needed a job since I had to put myself through school the last couple of years. So it was very convenient to be working at ESS at the same time. And of course, it was just perfect. I, actually neglected my education quite a bit by virtue of I'd go to school by day, and then I would work what mounted to the night shift at ESS. And they were very busy because about a month after I showed up there, they met Oscar Heil, and he had this air motion transformer tweeter that he wanted to show them, and they proceeded to license it, and then started moving very quickly toward manufacturing. And then they went to an even larger building, and well, the rest was history. But I got in there just before that, so I got to watch the entire process.
Did you actually own any of the speakers? Like, were they gracing your home?
Yes, they were. I was in R&D. I was designing a considerable portion of what went into it, mostly crossovers. And I had, of course, complete access to parts and equipment, and shop space and so on. And these guys were really great. They encouraged all that sort of stuff. They thought it was wonderful. So I did that for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And then, I had kind of a falling out with management there, and I left. The guy who was there is kind of a marketing director, but it was more toward the graphics and industrial design. His name was Rene Besnay. He and I formed Threshold. And that was in beginning of 1974. And by then, I had decided that I wanted to build amplifiers instead of speakers. I found that.
So why was the switch happened? Why did that happen?
It just appealed to me more. I'd been doing speakers for quite a while. On a lot of levels, I found speakers they're easy actually. And I was simply more intrigued by what we could do in amplifiers. And so we did that and launched our first product in 1975, which was the 800A.
So was that the first product that you've ever introduced as an amplifier?
Yes, that was my first commercial amplifier.
What were these?
They were all homebrew stuff.
What were the sonic properties you were going for with that amplifier?
Well, primary thing we wanted to do was to create an amplifier that operated Class A, but did so a little more efficiently than what was out there already. Traditionally, the efficiency factor of these amplifiers is such that they idle at more than twice their output power. I came up with a circuit that allowed it to basically improve the efficiency by a factor of 2. That is to say, it idled at the output power, which was a significant improvement. And we got a patent on that, and we went into manufacturing, and that was it, folks. We started building and selling them.
Was there any challenges that you faced doing that? Was it hard to do that?
Well, yeah, but it was hard mostly because it was just 2 guys and not really adequate amount of money. And so it was hard work. But actually, the amplifier itself came together rather nicely without that much trouble.
Awesome. Well, with that being said, was there any product in that period of time where you thought was a great product other than your own?
Other than my own? Well, in terms of amplifiers, back then, there was obviously the phase linear stuff. There were tube amplifiers. Lots of people had the tube amps. The Dynaco amps, solid state also. The amplifier actually that impressed me the most before I actually got my own product out was called the Dreadnought.
Oh, okay.
And I'm trying to remember the name of the company. It was I want to say Dayton Wright. That's not it. It was
so bad.
No, it was Dunlap Clark.
Okay.
Years later, by the way, I met Ron Dunlap. He was the nicest guy you could ever want to know. And this amplifier, they called it the Dreadnought, and I was impressed. It had a ton of big output transistors. It was designed to handle incredible amount. It wasn't necessarily rated at particularly high power. It was a powerful amplifier, a couple hundred watts at least. I actually don't know what the figure was, or I don't remember. But it had a massive bank of output devices. That impressed me enough that I made sure that my amplifier did also. I mean, the 800A had 48 output devices on it. I think the Dreadnought was about 24, something like that. But these were huge output stages in an industry that it was a big output stage back then if you had 4 output devices on a channel. And most of them were less. So big output stage. And I really was impressed by Dunlap Clark. If I'd had the money at that particular time for myself, that is what I would have bought, I'm sure. And also, it was, as far as I could make up, very intelligently designed. The schematics on it were, sophisticated and somewhat ahead of their time. Before that, JBL had the what they called the T circuit. I'm trying to remember the name. not a good day for memory. I'm trying to remember the name of the designer of that. But it was as far as I could see, the first really well done, fully complementary follower output circuit in the industry. And I'm trying to remember what the model was. It was like an SE60 or something. It was a reasonably powerful amplifier, but it was just a leap ahead of what everybody else was doing at that time. And that was even in advance of the phase linears and the other quasi-complementary stuff that became very popular in the late or mid and late 70s. And I might mention that ESS got their own amplifier up. Pete Wehrbeck designed something that did something in excess of 250 watts a channel, and it was a very, very fine amplifier. They had a slight issue with it, is that back then output transistors had a lot more of what is referred to as second breakdown, the bipolars, so that they could have it. They might be rated at 140 watts, but when the voltage hit higher levels and you were running high voltage supplies, it turned out that 140 was a pipe dream, and it would be more like 30 watt transistors. And so if you shorted the amp or otherwise really abused it, it died. They eventually found some beefier transistors for that. Nice place to work in this case, because I got to see all everybody else's failures in advance. And I, as I said, had the example of the Dreadnought in terms of what would survive any kind of audio attack.
So, I mean, you didn't sell Threshold until '97, and you started.
I sold Threshold in '87.
'87?
Oh,
my notes are wrong.
Adrian made the notes wrong.
No, it says
close.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay, that makes sense then. And then Past Labs started in '91.
That's correct.
So 4 years it took to get to the next stage. What happened?
Well, I had a nice 4-year contract.
Oh, yeah?
But what happened? Oh, well, we sold the company, and actually the company we sold it to, Dynatech, was great. Usually you hear the story about the acquisitions and the new parent company wrecks everything.
Well, they want to change everything, right?
Well, actually, see, Dynatech was one of those companies that didn't do that. They were great. They just said, here's your big bank account, and you know what to do, go forth. And so they were helpful, but they didn't interfere. No, we managed to wreck the company ourselves.
Well, the company still exists, so it's not, I mean, in one form or another.
But it got to a point where it was actually making very good money, and then everybody began spending, the management that we had began spending as if that was going to continue to increase, which it did not. And I was half of the decision making in terms of the personnel that we hired to run it, and the other one being my other partner Renee Besnay that I mentioned earlier. And in point of fact, we made some not so good decisions. So basically, began losing money under that situation, and there was a lot of squabbling and so on. In the end, I had to walk away. And by then too, I wanted to do something different. And going over, having a company where I totally own it, and on top of that, head off in another direction altogether, which is lower power field effect transistor design, which is where I still am. Well, the FETs were just simply had a lot of attractions, and at Threshold, like as with most other companies, they were working with bipolar transistors, and FETs hadn't quite taken off yet. That's what I wanted to work with.
So I think you touched a little bit on basis there, but the next question is, talking about the differences. What was the philosophy difference between the Threshold and the Past Lab products?
Well, Past Labs, one of the major things that has been a trend for me over the many years has been a push toward simplicity in circuitry. And the difference of using FETs is that you can get the results that you want with much simpler circuits and often with very much fewer parts. Like I can build a whole working amplifier with just one field effect transistor, and we can listen to it and it'll sound pretty good. You can't do that with bipolar. You can't make things as simply. Also, FETs, they're a lot closer to the tube characteristic. They have some real nice square law characteristics that you don't see with the bipolar devices. And once again, all these things allow, especially if you're running Class A, which is pretty much a signature trait. If you're running Class A, you can build really linear, very simple amplifiers. And the first piece out of Past Labs was a single-ended FET circuit at, let's see, I think it had 70 watts monoblock. That was the Aleph 1 or Aleph 0. And sometimes the circuits are a little more complicated than you would want, but the gain path of the circuit can always still be made very, very simple. And in the case of the Alephs, they started out initially with what would be thought of as 3 gain stages to the amplifier. This would be in contrast to other products where you're looking at a minimum of 4 bipolar stages, often more. I do have schematics from another famous company here that I always want to put on the wall, except that they take up so much space because they had like 9 gain stages in it. I kept it just because of that. Well, after the Aleph 0, I got it down to 2 gain stages for the products at Past Labs, and we kept it at 2 gain stages for quite a long time. Actually, until into the first X product that we made had only 2 gain stages, and it was 1,000 watt RMS per channel into 8. And it had only 2 stages, and it performed extremely well. So simplicity, though, is a kind of a central tenet here. I like to see what I can do with very simple circuits. It pleases me to see how far I can take that. But the other end of it is that simple circuits have simple problems, simple distortions. The distortion, they may not measure exceedingly well, but what they do have for distortion has an easy characteristic. It's second and third harmonic, which are something that sits within musical notes in any case. So it's not typically as problematic as some of the other kinds of distortions that you see, and that's Class A on one end, simple circuitry, and in my case using FETs, which I find we've been upgraded. Okay. I just think that's a very easy path for building really good sounding amplifiers, and reliable too, because they're, again, pretty simple. And they got huge output stages, the lesson learned from Dunlap Clark many years ago.
Okay, so I mean, here you have Past Labs, and it seems to be, and from my recollection of that time period, the amps were really fabulous. But at the same time,
but we don't speak of that in past tense.
Well, they're still really fabulous. They're still really good. It's something that when I talk to clients, our clients, and since we don't actually sell your product, unfortunately, I've talked to Adrian about it, but we don't sell your product, but we have clients who mention your products and they love it, right? And so we always have to compete with it, with the things that we do carry, which is, as you know, Macintosh.
Well, and let's say I have to compete with D'Agostino. I see a D'Agostino amp there.
Well, that too, yes. But First Watt then came about. So what was the genesis of that, even though Past Lab already seems to embody like your entire design philosophy?
Well, it does. However, when you're successful with product, and we've done very well, there's a certain conservative thing that kind of creeps in into your marketing, because your customers, your distributors, everybody has certain expectations ongoing of who you are, what kind of things you do, and what the product sounds like, and so on. And so when you have something that is successful, things get to be kind of conservative. We mutate the circuits, but we do so very slowly, and we don't do it very dramatically. I mean, the X amplifiers appeared in 1995. We made those specific models for 10 years, and then we did a little upgrade, retaining the same models, and we called them the 0.5 versions. And those were, you know, a little more sophisticated in the circuit, or they had other smaller improvements, but nothing dramatic. Again, it's a very conservative approach. After 10 years, which is about 5 years ago, we released the 0.8 versions of mostly the same products and a couple of new ones. So we're making incremental improvements. Interestingly enough, actually, the 0.5s are still selling and actually do rather well in Asia, along with the 0.8s. And they somehow seem to have each founded their own market in some countries. So actually, we still are making 0.8s last time I looked. I mean, 0.5s last time I looked. So it gets very conservative. And yet, at the same time, I'm a creative guy. I like to fool around with this stuff. I like to design amplifiers and build them. And first watt, I saw that as something where I could concentrate on little tiny Class A amplifiers, anything from 5 to about 25 watts, do anything I like. And you know, in other words, take any design idea that I like and toss it up against the wall as long as it fit well, it was obviously going to be Class A, because if you're going to build a 5-watt amplifier, you better have something special about it. But you know, it gave me the opportunity to be creative. Also, it serves as kind of a minor league testing ground for ideas and concepts that can then end up at past lives. So it was called First Watt because Dick Gosher famously had said, who cares what an amplifier sounds like at 100 watts if it sounds like crap at 1 watt? And I find, too, that a good percentage of the customers out there, whether they realize it or not, don't need much more than a watt. It always...
Yeah, I tell our clients this all the time, but they keep on insisting on buying like 400, 500, 600 watt Macintosh amps.
God bless their hearts, you know. But you know, I've got some tannoys here. Now they're 95 dB. That's efficient, you know, not the most, but it's efficient. And I have a scope hooked up to them, and people will sit and listen, and it's playing fairly loud. And I go, now see that? This is the 1 watt window on the scope. If you see the waveform leave the scope screen, you've exceeded what a 1 watt amplifier can do. And they're listening, and they never see it hit the edges. And it surprises people because they really think that there's more power going into that than is really happening. So having an appreciation of that, and also knowing that you can build a really nice Class A amplifier if you're not trying to also, you know, make it really huge and very powerful. And that actually was already covered by past labs anyways. So I wanted to have something also that was different and didn't cause trouble for the main company, because that's where the money is actually made. And this was intended to be a little hobby company for me to play with.
It's kind of got into a big hobby though, isn't it?
Well, yeah, you know, it's successful. And I started out with, I was only going to build 100 of any design and get it out there, see how it goes and so on, and then move on to the next thing. We did that for quite a while. But finally, there started to be a big enough customer base and dealers handling it that once again, that conservative thing starts creeping in, and they want continuous supply of whatever models that they particularly care for. The SIT, the SID amplifiers were one category, but one that really has shined just year after year after year is the J2, which was a little single-ended Class A amplifier, had balanced inputs, about 25 watts. And it used what were then very new silicon carbide power JFETs for its output transistors, and at the same time had the fabulous Toshiba JFET input transistors. It was just a two-stage piece. We still make them, but we're gonna let them go here. I'm gonna let the J2 go not before very long. We have something called the F8, which I view as its replacement. It's a similar sort of amplifier. It does not have balanced inputs, which doesn't seem to be a problem, and it has similar kind of power and numbers performance, but the design is kind of similar. But what's different about it is the J2 was a differential input stage, kind of like what you see with an op amp. In other words, it had a pair of input junction FETs forming a differential amplifier that then drove the output stage. And it would be known as a voltage feedback amplifier, technically. Since the guys are arguing about this VFA versus the alternatives at this point, it's kind of interesting to explore. I produced what really would be a current feedback version of the J2. Now, it doesn't mean that it takes the output current and uses it for feedback. The name CFA is actually kind of a misnomer. They call it current feedback because it's low impedance feedback. And you do it, in this case, you can do it with a single transistor instead of in the J2, there were 3 transistors required to make the front end work. And in this, there is only the one. And it's one of those Toshiba JFETs. So here we are, we've tossed a couple of transistors, we've tossed some open loop gain, but we've got just about the same numerical performance. And on top of that, more interestingly, is that the single input JFET, operating current CFA, they call it, its character, its transfer curve is the same as the transistor it drives, so that they can have kind of a one voice characteristic to them, and it gives a very pure character to the distortion that is there. And the numbers, at reasonable levels, the numbers are down in the 00 figures, and then they climb up and they start, 0.0 this, 0.0 that, and then at about clipping, it's about 1%. So it's got good numbers, it's got good damping factors, it's got excellent bandwidth, but the spectral character of the distortion is almost entirely dominant second harmonic and negative, what we call negative phase, which is a preferred mode that we work with. And then the third harmonic above that is another 20 dB down, and then there's nothing. So it's a very pure character for the distortion that's there. It's a low distortion amp, but it's not state-of-the-art low distortion. But I don't even care because it sounds great. And on some levels, I think it beats the J2.
So what speakers are you using when you voice the amplifier, what speakers are you using specifically to test it with?
Well, the company standard are the tannoys. These are 15-inch coaxials.
Modern tannoys or
no,
vintage?
Early 60s.
Yeah, so you're using like silver or red or gold drivers, that kind of thing?
Brown drivers.
Brown drivers.
They were tan. This was before the. However, in all cases, the drivers themselves have been refurbed. In fact, the pair that I have right now were refurbed by Tannoy of Japan.
Okay.
And were presented to me by the senior critic at Stereo Sound. I already had some, but these were
so lucky. You are so lucky.
And then I had for many years a business partner, both at Threshold, but also later at Pass Labs, Joe Samet, who after a while I made him be the president of the company so that I could go and play. But he was one of the best ears I ever heard or I ever met. I mean, he had just incredible ears, and he went on a crusade about building himself a pair of speakers that were adequate to be references for evaluating amplifiers. In the end, he settled on those tannoys. And in addition to that, he put about 10 years into a crossover for them, which was a variation on what Tannoy had done, but it had monstrously huge air core coils and all sorts of other really great stuff. And he just tuned them. I mean, but he had wonderful ears, and he was willing to work on it for about 10 years. I've got two of those. I mean, I have two pair. Those are the speakers that we use in the company. We've got, I think, we've got 4 pair of them for evaluating product. And as Joe used to say, look, they're not the best sounding speakers in the world, but they are extremely good for evaluating amplifiers. And it's quite true. You can pinpoint things with them that you might miss on what we might think of as more pleasant sounding pair of speakers. And then that said, I've got a lot of other speakers. I used to build speakers, you may recall, and after I started having lots of money and large amounts of space, I kept doing so. Now my biggest problem is storage.